I believe America has one of the best propaganda campaigns of all countries in the world. It's tough to justify the things that went on in slavery and see yourself in a good light. African Americans have believed what America says it is. You know, I talk to these Uber drivers. You should hear, I love this country. I love this country. I ain't never felt no love for this country, quite frankly. Although we became American citizens, people's hearts don't change merely because of words on paper called laws. The courthouse isn't a place where fairness occurs very often. It's just like an alcoholic or a drug addict. If you never acknowledge you have a problem, you can't fix it. Kind of like our U.S. Supreme Court. In some of its most recent decisions, they've indicated that racism has ended in America. Racism is perpetuated almost every newscast, and we just have to live with it. The news networks are playing to an older white audience. The words that were used, imagery that's put up on television. I was watching one creator who showed where they had a meetup at Newport Beach in California. 400 white kids at this meetup. They were fighting, 4 or 5 arrests. There even was some extensive vandalism. They never said the race of the people, as had it been a group of black people, it would have been race central. Day before yesterday, one of the major developers in this community wants to build on some church property. I said, well, what did they want to build? And the young lady told me that they want to build workforce housing. I said, did they define for you what workforce housing was? What's the minimum income you have to get the workforce housing? $150,000. I said, now tell me how many teachers at your school make $150K a year? We get duped into these kind of deals, and what will our community have left when the deal is finished? Welcome to the Ryles Report, where we add historical context to life, love, and politics. The Ryles Report is now in session. Hey, before you get into this next episode, I want you to like, comment, and share, and subscribe. No, seriously, like, comment, share, and subscribe. That's how we keep adding content just like this. I believe that the content we provide is educational, enlightening, and empowering for our entire community. I know you're going to enjoy this next episode. America changed its laws, but did it ever change its heart? We ended legal segregation. We passed civil rights legislation. We declared that every citizen should be treated equally, but laws do not eliminate prejudice, redistribute power, correct media propaganda, or force institutions to treat people fairly. Today, we're talking about the difference between what America says it is and what Black Americans have actually experienced. I believe America has one of the best propaganda campaigns of all countries in the world. And African Americans, for the most part, have believed in what America says it is, and has rarely questioned that it has said it is one thing, yet our reality is something quite different. Immigrants come here thinking, this is a place, I would listen to, I talk to these Uber drivers, and you should hear, I love this country. I love this country. I ain't never felt no love for this country, quite frankly. They have this view based on what they've been sold. Yeah. And what they've been sold is a bunch of bullshit. And it takes them a generation or so to realize that what they've been sold is, their children will know it's not true in most instances. And, because most people don't move, but maybe one economic class above their parents. They either stay the same as their parents or they move one economic class above their parents. I think back to our civil rights icons and what they were trying to achieve by getting civil rights laws and amendments to the Constitution. And the reality is laws don't change the way people feel. So although we got the right to vote, although we got birthright citizenship, although we became American citizens, we never have received full and complete citizenship and have been treated equally in this country. And I can prove it That's because people's hearts don't change merely because of words on paper called laws. Laws don't change hearts. And you can have as many laws as you want on the books that say that people can't discriminate. It's still not going to change the heart of the person that is a racist or a bigot. I did a clip for the law firm talking about how African Americans have this unrealistic faith in the justice system. And I explained that many times I am trying to pick a jury, and I can tell that there are people who are being less than truthful about how they feel on certain issues that they think might get them kicked off the jury because they are earnestly trying to be a part of the jury. And they're trying to be a part of the jury so that they can torpedo the case of the litigant or my client at the end of the case. When we look at the composition of juries, we see that they are, for the most part, in communities across this country, they can be all white. And we know that there is a bias in this country. I think most people admit that racism still exists on some level. So if you understand that racism exists and you're supposed to be judged by a jury of your peers, having an all-white jury in and of itself says that you probably are not going to have a jury of your peers if you're African American, Hispanic, or any other non-white nationality. And as a result, we have probably some of the lowest rates of success in the courtroom, whether it be criminal or civil. Well, whenever I talk to a client and the insurance company has said that they are not going to pay anymore, and that they automatically say, well, let's take them to court. And I don't have a problem taking them to court. We try cases every year, but I have difficulty trying to express to the clients that the courthouse isn't a place where fairness occurs very often. The courthouse is a place where you can go through the justice system. You can do all of the things that say that you're going to get a fair trial, but a fair trial is not guaranteed. In fact, the chances of you getting a fair trial are less likely than they are for you getting an unfair trial. The likelihood is you'll get an unfair trial, a trial where there's no one that looks like you on the jury, a trial where there are people who have stated biases against you are going to be allowed to sit on that jury, and you're going to have judges that likewise believe that just because you have jurors, everybody can be fair. And that's just not true. And judges who don't look like you, that likewise have internalized unrecognized racism within them. And so as a result of that, some of their decisions are going to likewise reflect the fact that they don't recognize race or racism. Kind of like our U.S. Supreme Court. In some of its most recent decisions, they've indicated that racism has ended in America. And my lived life experience and the lived life experience of my family and my friends says that racism is as alive today as it was when I was born. Racism has several components, but it is treating you differently as a result of what your quote unquote race is, because we know that race is a false construct created by a botanist called Linnaeus. But regardless, race is generally determined by the color of your skin. And so to have preconceived notions about who and what you are merely because of the color of your skin is a general understanding of race. And then having the ability based upon the power dynamic, meaning that you have power over another person and you have privileges that person of a different race, you have those privileges that they do not enjoy, even though you both are quote unquote American citizens. Prejudice, anybody can be prejudiced. I could be prejudiced against broccoli. I don't like broccoli. Prejudice is not as intense as racism, is dealing primarily with the preconceived notions that a person will behave or act in a certain way because of the color of their skin or because of their nationality or ethnic origin. Likewise, because of the color of their skin. Prejudice is just a dislike of people that look a certain way. You can be prejudiced against long dresses. You can be prejudiced against people who have blonde hair. The difference between racism and prejudice is truly the power dynamic. It's the ability to make a phone call to the police, and when the police arrive, if it's a white woman and a black man, the black man is automatically going to be deemed to be the suspect. It's the ability to, black men make up 6% of the population, but they make up 60% of the prison population. Black homeowners selling their homes in the very same neighborhoods as whites, more often than not, homes are sold for less and appraised at lower values if the appraiser knows that the homeowner is black. I mean, these are things that are baked into the system that are, what I say, a part of the power dynamic. Prejudice isn't necessarily a part of the power dynamic. Racism is. Racism is the system that makes it such that people who are not in the dominant race, the outcome that they receive in the medical system is worse than that of the dominant culture. The opportunity at capital to start businesses is affected. So all of the, I guess, elements of being an American are not afforded to certain groups as a result of race, whereas the race of the non-dominant group cannot affect any of those issues when it comes to the dominant group. So black people can't, for the most part, can't deny white folks loans. Black people can't, for the most part, keep white folks out of their neighborhood. Black people, we don't have the same power. There's a power dynamic that is different for black people versus white people. And racism is one of the factors that is used in order to wield that power dynamic negatively against black people and other non-whites. I think having racist thoughts and ideologies requires in order for you to identify them, it does require introspection about your behavior and why you feel that way. I mean, the propaganda against Black Americans is so intense that even in Africa, when I was in Ghana and Senegal, in Kenya, they have a view of African Americans that has been created by the media that in many respects is negative. And so our image and who we are as a people we don't control how it's created. That's done by whites. You can look at television shows, and I still remember in the 70s. I mean, you black characters played certain roles. They were always the cool guy. They were always, never the student, never the smartest person in the room. And so when that imagery is pushed out over the world, then people begin to identify with false images of entire groups of people based on their race. And so it is very difficult for a person not to be influenced by popular culture and what has been created. People are complex and people are lazy. People are complex in the sense that even the worst person from the hood is not like every other person in the hood. They have nuances. Yet, in order for us to be able to conceptualize that person, we place them in a box and we think that they are like all others who we have seen in that box. And we don't give them an opportunity to show us that they are not like everybody that's in that box. It affects even black people against black people. I mean, I might see a group of young black guys walking towards me and automatically in my mind say to myself, what they up to? And that was created as a result of imagery, as a result of TV, movies. I mean, there are a whole host of reasons that thought comes into my mind. Now, the difference is I have identified that I've been affected by popular culture and media. I'm not stupid. I know that, if I'm in an area where I'm not recognized or I'm not, there are some realities, but the singular reality is that you don't judge people. I try not to judge people or prejudge before I get an opportunity to know them. But I'm not going to place myself in a position where I am in danger either. And, so statistically, we know that there are some places that are that have higher instances of crime than others. And if you are not from that community and you stand out, that's anywhere in the world. They tell you when you go to South Africa, don't walk around with your phone out. That's what Americans do. So the reality of understanding where you are is one aspect, but the initial perception of the people you're encountering that you don't know, that don't look like you and may not share your race, comes from popular culture and the imagery created that places everybody in a simple and easy box so that we can discern who to trust and who not to trust. And that is something that, for the most part, in this world, Black people don't control their own image. I don't think that every white person is a rabid racist. I do think that every white person has some level of racism in them because they are affected by their environment. They may have some prejudice in them, but we can talk more about that on the other side of this break. I was watching one creator who showed where they had a meetup at Newport Beach in California. And there were over 400 white kids at this meetup, and they were fighting. I think that there were 4 or 5 arrests. There even was some extensive vandalism in Newport Beach, which is a relatively wealthy community, beachside community in California. And what he pointed out was that when they did talk about this meetup and all these kids, they found one Black kid that was there. And when they started talking negatively, they flashed his picture. They never said the race of the people who were engaging in the vandalism, the fighting, unlike the way they report if the same thing were true. They didn't call the breaking into some stores looting. So the words that were used, the imagery that's put up on television, the entire way that the event was covered was race neutral. Whereas had it been a group of Black people, it would have been race central. That the race of the people who engaged in this meetup that turned into a brawl and turned into some looting and turned into people getting injured, the race of those people would have been a primary or central theme of why they were doing it. And that really, I think, kind of illustrates how in the news media, especially, racism is perpetuated almost every newscast. I can show you some way that an issue is reported that is going to negatively reflect on the Black community. And we just have to live with it. We don't own most of the news networks. Truth in reporting is something that if we were trying to come to rid this country of the racist mindset towards Blacks and immigrants, there would be a division within the news that controlled how the message is told because it is so effective. We talk about the civil rights laws were created in order to end segregation and the legal limitations of citizenship in this country. No one has ever said that civil rights laws were meant to bring the races together or to end racism. This country has never acknowledged that racism exists. Now, certain sociologists, psychologists have verified that racism exists, but the country as a governmental entity has never acknowledged that racism exists. If you never acknowledge you have a problem, it's just like an alcoholic or a drug addict, you can't fix it. And why I say that is this. In other countries, I did an interview with a young lady from South Africa. And in South Africa, the equivalent word for the N-word in South Africa is kafir. Kaffir. Well, when I did my podcast with this young lady, she didn't even say the K word. She said the word we don't use anymore. Countries that are serious about trying to end racism do things like that. In Germany, you're not allowed to do the Siegheil, the salute that was so popular during the days of Hitler, or wear a Nazi symbol. Those are the kinds of things that they realize that these images and these ideas are held in images. Yet in this country, for whatever reason, the N-word has never been made illegal. And the justification has been the First Amendment. So ridding the country of racism has never been a primary concern. Giving lip service to civil rights has been enough. And unfortunately, as African Americans, we've allowed it to be enough. If you look at what has happened to the major news networks, CNN has been bought by right-wing conservatives and will ultimately become another arm of the Fox News type media. MSNBC has remained, I guess, more to the left. But if you look at the statistics, who's watching the news networks are playing to an older white audience. And the way that it is being presented is in order to maintain the confirmation bias that the older white audience already has regarding their outlook on America. And what I mean by that in simple terms is Black people are bad and are the biggest cause of trouble in this country, and white people are good, and we're having to deal with all these bad Black people and immigrants who are coming over trying to change America and make it something it was never intended to be. In a very simple and simplistic way, that's how I see American media and news today in this country. If you look at the Articles of the Confederacy, every state within the Confederacy pledged that slavery would always exist had they won the war. So you have a certain population of people who were never punished for seceding from the Union, who believed that slavery was okay. And that same element of society has historically maintained its ideology. It's just not able to enforce its ideology because the Union won. So it goes all the way back to why the Civil War was fought. You know, when I was in school, it was taught that the reason the Civil War was fought was as a result of states' rights. Those states wanted the right to pass laws that the federal government had to respect. What were those laws? They were slave laws. They were the Fugitive Slave Act and laws like that. They could leave South Carolina and go to New Hampshire and capture someone who had escaped and bring them back to South Carolina. There's always been an element in this country that wanted to utilize the free labor of Black people, or to have a subgroup of Americans who had no rights or very few rights. That element still exists. They just can't be as vocal about it as they were in the 1800s. But you see it every day. You see it with this administration and the attacks on history. I mean, it's relentless almost every day. And why history? Why is history attacked so much by this administration? Let's talk about it after the break. You don't study history for the purpose of studying history. You study history to learn about the past in order to predict the future. So if you understand that the Confederacy, after the war, those who fought on the side of the Confederates or the Confederacy committed treason against the Union. I was always told that if you commit treason against this country, you face the death penalty. This country did not have the stomach to exact the final penalty on those who fought for the Confederacy, and in fact allowed them to go back to their communities. In most instances, gave them their land back, minus the slaves. So if you understand that you still have an element of people who generationally were taught this mindset, that still exists in this country. You don't want to tell an accurate history of who and what they were. You attack history. And that's what this administration has been doing, is attacking history, because it's tough to justify the things that went on in slavery and see yourself in a good light. And this administration would prefer that portion of history, the degradation of a people, the mistreatment of people because of the color of their skin and because they have been treating people like cattle. This administration would prefer that never be told in its most truthful element. Those facts that Thomas Jefferson would be considered a pedophile because he had children with a 14-year-old half-sister of his wife, Sally Hemings. Those kind of stories make America feel queasy and makes those who would have been fighting on the side of the Confederacy feel a little queasy. So rather than have the greater America know the truthful story of its historical beginnings, it would prefer to blind America to that bad part, to that part that isn't comfortable talking about, so that they can continue with the propagation of the propaganda that America is the land of the free and home of the brave. These simplistic ideations about who America and what America is helps continue the American story and allows for America to continue to be able to have a class system where you have the very rich and you are having a shrinking middle class and a permanent bottom economic class filled with blacks and other immigrants. I think that we are becoming more like places like Venezuela, many of the countries in the world, Guatemala, where you have two classes of people, rich and poor. Day before yesterday, one of the major developers in this community wants to build on some church property. And I said, well, what did they want to build? And the young lady told me that they want to build workforce housing. And this is the thing about America, is that we love to use terms that seem one way, but are in reality very, very different. She told me, she says, it's housing for school teachers and for police officers and firefighters. And that's whenever anyone says this thing, workforce housing, that's the line that always follows. It's for school teachers and police officers and firefighters, right? Well, I said, did they define for you what workforce housing was? And she says, yes. And I said, what's the minimum income you have to get the workforce housing? $150,000. I said, now tell me, and this woman was a principal at a school, tell me how many teachers at your school make $150K a year? Malcolm X had a brilliant quote. He said, just because I put kittens in an oven doesn't make them biscuits. So just because I call it workforce housing doesn't mean it's for the working people. The median salary in Palm Beach County in some areas is $23 an hour. That's less than $40,000 a year. How is that workforce housing? Those are working people. I got caught up when I was a city commissioner. I got caught in that trap of, well, it's workforce housing, and not asking the second question. Well, what does that mean? Because politicians, lawyers, real estate moguls use a whole bunch of terms that if you don't know what they mean, they make them sound one way when in reality they are another way. Now, workforce housing at $150,000 is not workforce housing for what would be considered the middle class here in Palm Beach County. The median price of a home being somewhere around $600,000 in Palm Beach County. There are very few people who can even qualify to buy a house. So now here is an apartment where you got to make $150,000 a year to move into it, or a condo. You can call it condo, apartment, same thing. But the developer is selling the black church in notion that they're going to be helping the community by providing workforce housing, and the church is either purposely blind or haven't done their research. if they're purposely blind, that means that they are collaborators with the developer to use their land that should be going to their community. It's a piece of property attached to the edifice of the church that they can sell, and they'll probably put a 20-story condo on that property because it overlooks a lake, and it could look back towards the city until they build something in front of it. Very centrally located, would be a great development. And it would be especially great development if that church was able to get with 2 or 3 other churches and develop it and make it so that it could be workforce housing. I see churches that get in bed with developers and don't do the research and do a good deal for the community that they serve as being collaborators. I want to tell you about Ryan Coogler's deal that shocked me when he was negotiating to sell the rights to the movie Sinners. We'll do that after this break. So Ryan Coogler's deal for Sinners, the guy did have some leverage. He is a part of the Marvel franchise with Black Panther. He's made billions of dollars for the movie studios. And so he had leverage. Now, a lot of times we get leverage and don't use it. We just let that asset go. We continue to operate like we aren't in the driver's seat. The deal that Ryan Coogler got, Hollywood is talking about. First of all, he gets to get paid off of the first money made on the movie. Ordinarily, the way it works is the studio recoups all that it spent. In the case of Sinners, I think they spent $90 million. They would get the first $90 million, and then after that, then the producer would begin getting paid. Ryan Coogler gets paid day one. Second of all, which was probably one of the, I think, shrewdest and most Black conscious moves that I've seen from an artist in years. The movie rights to Sinners revert back to him in 25 years, meaning he'll own that product. And so when you see reruns, all the money will be going back to him. Why was that so important? Because that was non-negotiable. He said, I did a movie about the theft of Black culture, Sinners, where these Irish people wanted the Black people to come and give them their ability to play the blues. He says, I was not going to make a movie that gave Black culture to white people and walk away. So it became non-negotiable that I keep my movie at some point, or I get my movie back at some point. I'm not giving it to you forever, which has happened in the music industry for eons, that so many artists never own their publishing rights or never own the rights to their own songs, that people are playing their songs today in jingles and on TV, and not a dime goes back to the estate of the artist who made the music. So his keeping the rights or getting the rights to revert back to him in 25 years has Hollywood just talking. It is a blueprint for how, when we have the power, to use the power. So if we go to the church has an asset that once it's gone, it's gone. Once property's gone, it's gone. It ain't coming back. If you have that kind of power, why would you operate like they are doing you a favor? You should be dictating the terms of the deal. What I have seen is they'll say that they're going to have workforce housing, but they'll have 5 units in a 50-unit building. When I asked the young lady that we were discussing earlier, I said, how many units? Well, we ain't talked about that yet. So you don't even know how many workforce $150,000 units. The rest could be market, which means that they could be going for $300,000 or $400,000. Unfortunately, we get duped into these kind of deals because we don't have lawyers who are willing to either give their time pro bono, or lawyers who are experienced in these areas, or people who are experienced in these areas who will assist the church. Our communities are going to have to work more cooperatively. I mean, many people say that you could have 5 Black churches on the same corner and none of them even talk or work together, and we see what's happening as a result of that. I got to see, when I was running for office this last time, that the Black church is slowly but surely becoming irrelevant. And it is becoming irrelevant because of a host of things, primarily because its message isn't meeting the people. The Black church has not done a good job of maintaining its relevance in the Black community with either its message and or its action. If you look at the larger Black churches in some of these metropolitan cities, they have homeless ministries, they have GED programs, they have trade programs, they have programs that are meeting the needs of the people. The Black Panther Party for Self-Defense had a 10-point plan, and it had programs that met the needs of the people. That's why it grew so fast. It had the very first sickle cell anemia testing. It had the first breakfast program. The federal government took it over. The breakfast at school, that came from the Black Panther Party program. The Black church does not seem to understand what the Black community needs. And by virtue of not providing what the Black community needs, its numbers are dwindling. Couple that with them wanting to engage in what I call Facebook ministries, where they allow their members to Zelle their tithes and sit home and watch service on Facebook Live. Well, I grew up that there is a soul experience with going to the church house where I knew my church members, and we called each other brother and sister. So you had a church family. Well, you don't have a church family if everybody's sitting home on Facebook, cooking breakfast on one hand and watching the football game on the other, and catching a glimpse of the choir every now and then. The Black church is not meeting the needs of the people, like the Black Panther Party, for instance, with programs. In Palm Beach County, we have a situation where 80% in some schools of the children are not reading on grade level. Here is a perfect opportunity for all those school teachers that are in certain churches to have an after-school program. When the state of Florida decided that it was going to remove AP Black history from the schools, it was a perfect opportunity for the Black church to take up what wasn't being taught properly anyway, to take up teaching Black history in its schools. Get together and come up with a Black history curriculum. Get people like Hannah Nicole Jones from Howard, get Greg Carr from Howard. Any one of these Black historians would have gladly given their time to create a curriculum for kindergarten through 12th grade Black history, real Black history. That was a perfect opportunity. And so the Black church has missed many opportunities. And I dare say that financially and economically, many, if not most, are in dire straits because they are relying on tithes and offerings to maintain the edifice and don't have any financial ministries outside of Sunday to continue the church to grow and to continue to build on the ministry. The lesson in all of this is that freedom cannot exist only on paper. A law is not justice. Representation is not power. Access is not ownership. A charitable label is not community development. And an institution's history does not guarantee its future relevance. Black communities must learn to examine the language that is being used, identify who controls the asset, understand who receives the long-term benefit, and stop approaching negotiations as if someone else is doing us a favor. Whether we are discussing a courtroom, a newsroom, a movie studio, a housing development, or a church, the question remains the same. Who has the power? Who owns the outcome? And what will our community have left when the deal is finished? Until we learn how to use our leverage, protect our assets, tell our own history, and build institutions that meet our actual needs, America's promises will remain more powerful than its performance. And we can no longer afford to confuse the two. Subscribe to the Ryles Report and share this with someone who's willing to question what America says about itself. And if you have an informed perspective on African American history, law, culture, economics, or an experience that can educate, enrich, and empower the Black community, complete the guest form in our bio or contact us by email. Visit richryles.com. Until next time, as we say on the Ryles Report, a day you don't learn something new is a wasted day. And on the Ryles Report, we have no wasted days.